Okay, folks, we are listening to Bond Court. This is the chance when an arrested individual first faces a judge. It's usually to settle out whether or not they're going to bond out. In other words, put some money aside to prove to the state that they're actually going to make it to their real court appearance, the next appearance, the initial appearance. So, to help us unravel some of that and to talk about some of the other cases we're covering here at Law and Crime, I want to bring Vincent T. Hill in. He's a former police officer, a law enforcement expert, and he's joining us now on Law and Crime. Vincent, good to see you.
Aaron, good to see you as always.
Okay, so let's talk about these initial appearances. This is the first time somebody who's been arrested by someone like yourself gets in front of a judge. What's your take?
Well, Aaron, this is the chance for the judge to actually set a bond, a reasonable bond based on the crime, right? So you won't see $1 million bond for, say, a misdemeanor assault, but the judge is going to set a bond based on the crime and also based on the defendant's criminal history. So this is the chance for that defendant to either make that bond and come back to their court date. And if they can't make that bond, they have to wait until their initial arraignment, which is usually 10 days from the initial arrest.
So that's what we've been watching go down. It's the front end of the criminal justice system. All too often here we're watching trials. That's the back end. Of course, a lot can happen in between the front end and the back end. There can be pleas. There can be, arrangements. There's deal making between prosecutors and defense attorneys. All of that goes on in the middle. The middle we usually don't get to see because that's behind closed doors. So that's a sense of what we've been looking at right now. But I want to talk about the Tex McIver case because we're in the midst of jury deliberations there. We are in verdict watch. A case of a man who is accused of shooting and killing his wife intentionally. The top charge is indeed murder in Georgia. That's what they're charging him with. He faces a number of other charges, including lesser included to murder. He's got an aggravated assault in there. He's got a felony murder, which is basically the aggravated assault plus the fact that the victim died, and they're trying to make that add up to felony murder. A couple of logical somersaults as part of that, and also the influencing a witness charge. There's one of those that is left. The original indictment had 3. The judge wiped 2 of them clean and said only 1 remains. That's as to Danny Joe Carter, because there was some clear testimony on that. So, Vincent, you're a former law enforcement official. A lot of us who are sitting here on the legal end of it are just thinking, okay, this Tex McIver just doesn't look like the kind of guy that we necessarily think committed murder. In other words, the state hasn't proven it to us beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what many of us are sitting here saying. You're on a different side of this equation. How do you take this case?
Well, you definitely can't base it on looks because Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy look
when I say look like, I mean
yeah,
the facts don't match up to what the law alleges. That's what I mean.
Absolutely. The facts don't match. And, having done this job and having arrested people for murder, just the circumstances of how it all went down, for me as a law enforcement, as a private investigator, the scenario to me doesn't make sense. You have a witness inside the vehicle, which is Tex's wife's best friend. They're at a restaurant, they're having drinks, everyone's happy. The state didn't present any witness from Longhorn that says, oh, they were in here arguing. I heard them arguing. And then the gun goes off and it goes through this seat, which has a bunch of metal. And I think the defense touched on that during closing arguments. There was no guarantee that that bullet would have struck Diane or that it would have killed Diane. So the facts, to me, just haven't been proven by the state that this was a planned, calculated murder as they have presented.
Well, this is an interesting perspective coming from you because a lot of people who watch try to sort of pin us into positions almost the way a member of the Republican Party would be presumed to hold certain conservative positions and Democrats the opposite. I try to sit here and look at the cases dispassionately and judge them based on the facts and what I know the law requires the state to prove. Oftentimes we get criticism saying, oh, you're way too soft on defendants, you're way too hard on prosecutors, we want more strong prosecutorial advocacy here on Law and Crime. Some people accuse us of that. You're the guy on the law enforcement end, and you're basically echoing, as I understand it, the position of the Atlanta Police Department, which was not to go for the top charge. That was added in later. And that's because the investigators and you're agreeing with them, just didn't see this as a run-of-the-mill murder case. It doesn't look like murder. It doesn't smell like murder. The facts just don't match what the law is for murder.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Aaron. And again, as an investigator, as a police officer, the thing I would look for would be if Tex came to the hospital and said, hey, someone shot my wife. And then as we investigate, we find out that Tex did it. Then yes, there's a murder charge there. But from the beginning, Tex has said, I shot my wife. And at the time when she was transported to the hospital, it wasn't a murder at that point. It was just a gunshot victim. So there's so many ways, so many different scenarios that Tex could have set up this brilliant plan that the state claims, other than doing it in the car with the witness. He could have set up a carjacking. He could have done it at the house and said an intruder came in because he's way out in Putnam County. There's so many ways that Tex could have gotten away with this and done it as a murder besides what happened in that vehicle that Sunday night.
Well, let's talk about this. You've been in this field. You know what these things look like. Let's talk about some of the state's key evidence here. Evidence that there might be a second will. Investigators have been looking for it. They can't find it. Trying to insinuate that it might be out there. Does that look like a murder case to you?
No, I mean, if you can't find the second will, it definitely doesn't look like there was any motive there. And even if there was a second will, let's be honest, Tex.
We may have lost you there, Vincent. We're going to try to get you back again. The feed froze up there again. We're talking about the Tex McIver case. I have you back, Vincent? You froze up for a minute there. The feed froze up. I'm sorry. We thought we lost you. Would you mind making your point a second time?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was saying is, no, it definitely doesn't constitute murder just because there's this allegation of a second will. I mean, let's be clear. Diane had money. Tex had money. Did he have as much money as Diane? Maybe not. But anytime there's a spouse involved and there's money, I mean, I've been married twice. When I was married, there was wills, there was power of attorneys, there was things of that nature. And I definitely don't have the financial status of Diane McIver, but those are things that married couples do. And just the allegation that there could have been this second will, to me, if I was a juror, that's not enough to make me say, yeah, he did it, because you haven't shown me this second will that said Tex was not getting anything and it was going to the stepson, Austin. You haven't shown me that.
Okay, I want to ask you something else here, Vincent. You've investigated cases like this. Talk about accidental shootings. When a shooting is accidental, what tips your mind off in those incubatory moments when you're first running into a possible defendant, first running into someone in a situation like this? What convinces you that it's accidental versus intentional?
Well, of course, you have to gauge the person's body movement. You have to gauge what they tell you. The most important thing to remember is the first statement is usually the very truest statement when you're dealing with a suspect or an individual involved in something like this, because you don't have time to go back and make up stories. You don't have time to go back and reflect on it. So the most important thing is here, the first statement is usually the most accurate and the most correct statement. And from the beginning, when when Diane herself went in the hospital and said, my husband shot me, it was an accident. Tex said it was an accident. Danny Joe said it was an accident. No one came back and said, well, Tex told me he was going to shoot her. No one said that to this day. Danny Joe hasn't said it. She was in the vehicle. The prosecution couldn't come up with a witness that said, yes, he said he was going to shoot her, or a witness that said, oh, he told me one day he was looking up how to kill your spouse. You don't have any of that here. So I would say the very first statement is usually the best one to go by.
You make a good point. Look, there probably were other forensic reviews here that probably turned up nothing. They've got these emails about disagreements about a will. That was 5 years before the shooting. You know,
exactly.
that's like dragging up an argument that was settled 5 years ago in a relationship. It's just, I mean, in that context, it would be perceived as dirty arguing. You know, what if Diane McIver had gone to Tex and said, oh, 5 years ago, we disagreed about that? He'd say, honey, you can't bring that up. We settled that. But here, the prosecutor did indeed bring it up. But I will tell you, one of the real issues I've got with this case, and that I think the prosecution's got a nugget here. Of course, they've got to have a nugget. They've got to get over a probable cause hearing. Okay, they've got to get over one hurdle to present it to the jury. Then the jury has another hurdle to clear as far as reasonable doubt. But these odd statements that Tex McIver was making to Danny Jo Carter, basically asking her to lie about how she wound up in the hospital. Does that, in the opinion of Vincent Hill, law enforcement expert, former police officer, sound like something that somebody would do if a shooting was accidental? Would they ask someone who was an eyewitness or an ear witness to change their story potentially as to how they arrived at the hospital?
Not necessarily, but to that point, it doesn't make you a killer. It doesn't make you a murderer. It could have been accidental. Listen, I've had suspects lie to me for numerous things about the dumbest stuff. And I'm like, why did you lie to me about this? I was going to find out anyway. A lot of times people will lie to try to cover up something else, whatever it is. I don't know. But just the fact that Tex lied does not prove that it wasn't an accident. And I can understand, especially with Tex being an attorney, I can understand the statement, oh, this doesn't look good, because I'm sure Tex has probably tried cases where the spouse was the suspect, and it's always the spouse that's usually the suspect. So, of course, people are going to think, oh, yeah, he did it on purpose. So when he told Danny Jo, hey, this isn't going to look good, part of me understands why he said that from a legal standpoint.
Part of me thinks the guy is just used to having control of situations. Part of me wonders if he was in the panic of the situation, not necessarily panic because he's trying to get out of something, but just, oh my gosh, this happened. A few minutes ago, we were enjoying dinner. Now my wife is dying on an operating room table. Maybe he was afraid that Danny Jo Carter would get sucked into this, and he was trying to protect her in sort of like this twisted logic kind of way. That's how I've characterized it. I could be completely wrong. Does that sound like it makes sense, or does it not make any sense to you?
No, I mean, that makes perfect sense. I mean, Danny Jo was just a friend who happened to be driving that day. And, we don't know what she's thinking, but she probably thought the same thing. Like, I don't even want to be involved in this. My best friend just died. I was here when it happened. I don't want to be involved in this. And maybe that's what Tex was trying to do, was to protect Danny Jo from having to be involved and having to take the stand later like she did in this trial.
Shifting gears a little bit, law enforcement perspective. You have to, I'm assuming, approach different suspects in different ways. When you're arresting somebody on the street, right after a crime's been committed, they literally have the smoking gun, things are going to be a little bit more rough and tumble. How do the police have to approach a suspect like Tex McIver? Do they have to approach him differently than they would another suspect?
Yeah, absolutely. Not just because, he was talked to hours later after this happened, but keep in mind, he's an attorney as well. And law enforcement knew that. So you have to be really careful, especially when you're dealing with attorneys, because he knows his rights. He knows he doesn't have to say anything. He could just lawyer up at that exact moment and walk out if need be, if he wanted to. So you have to be very careful when you're dealing with an attorney and when you're dealing with a spouse and the other spouse has just died. You have to use kid gloves to get them to talk, to get them to trust you, to tell you what happened.
If you were the investigator who was handling this case from its inception, would you have recommended charges like this or not?
I don't think I would have gone for a felony murder charge at all. If anything, I probably would have gone with involuntary manslaughter because, there's that never-ending argument that, malice can be brought up in a split second, right? But when you look at this, you look at the evening, you look at everything that was going on, I just don't see Tex getting to that point from the time they get off the exit to the time that shooting happened. So to me, when you're talking about murder, felony murder, first-degree murder, you have to prove intent, you have to prove malice. And it takes me back to the Trayvon Martin case, as I've said before, when the state kept pressing for first-degree murder and the jury was asking the charging order for manslaughter, that should have told the state, we need to downgrade this charge to manslaughter, but they didn't. And the reason George Zimmerman got off, contrary to what people will tell you it was about race, because the state overcharged and they could not prove the elements of that crime of murder. And I think that could be what happens here with Tex McIver.
It could be. So, Vincent Hill, law enforcement expert, former police officer, great to have your perspective, your opinion here on the Law and Crime Network. Covering here on Law and Crime. This is the Brian Hyde case. We haven't talked about it very much. It's underway in Florida. This is a triple murder case, and the suspect, unbeknownst to the jury, is an undocumented immigrant. That got snuck out in his first case. The judge declared a mistrial. The second case against him just picked up yesterday. We're joining it midstream. To get you caught up on the facts of the case, let's listen to this.
The trial of an undocumented immigrant from Belize accused of a triple homicide began this week in Lehigh Acres, Florida. Brian Hyde is charged with 3 counts of second-degree murder and a charge in the death of an unborn child for his alleged involvement in the murder of his aunt, her daughter, who was pregnant, and the daughter's boyfriend in August 2015. The case gained national attention.
Yeah, Kelly, we know Brian Hyde first came to this country in January of this year. Investigators revealing today he entered illegally through Texas.
This is the second trial for Hyde, who faced a jury in November 2017. The first trial ended in a mistrial when a witness inadvertently talked about Hyde's immigration status. The defense contends local law enforcement ignored potential evidence which could have pointed to a different suspect and exonerated Hyde. For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
All right, we are picking up the Brian Hyde trial midstream. Let's go back to the courtroom again. Second-degree murder charges in Florida on a triple homicide.
Something needs to be sent.